Welcome back to Reddit Tales by Uncle Sammy. I see you, I appreciate you, and I'm thankful you subscribe and keep showing up. This space is built on your insights. Leave your thoughts and lessons below. Now, cue the tension, cue the truth, let's get into it. Before the story starts, pay attention to the way betrayal usually enters a house. Not with one huge confession, but with ordinary things being quietly renamed. A work dinner becomes strategy. A changed routine becomes growth. A broken tradition becomes not a big deal. When the person you love starts protecting their story more than your peace, that is not something to explain away forever. It does not mean panic. It does mean stop numbing yourself and look carefully at what has changed. My wife told me she was leaving me while a trumpet player in the corner tried to make a love song out of an old standard. The room was dim, all amber lamps and polished wood. The kind of supper club in Corktown where people leaned close across white tablecloths and spoke softly like the world outside did not exist. Simone sat across from me in a cream coat she had not worn for me, her lipstick exact, her posture perfect, and said, "I signed a lease in Midtown. I'm moving out next week." Then her face locked up because she looked past my shoulder and saw who had just walked in. Before we get into this dinner confession and shocking marriage betrayal, tell me this in the comments. If your wife said she was leaving you at dinner, would you stay calm or walk out right there? And if you enjoy emotionally intense cheating wife stories, relationship drama, and real consequence storytelling like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. For one strange second, my body reacted before my mind did. My hands went cold. My jaw tightened so hard I could hear my teeth touch. But underneath the shock was something harder and quieter. Recognition. I had been waiting all evening for that door to open. Simone had not. That was the difference between us. She thought she was arriving at a controlled ending, a clean speech, a civilized little burial for our marriage. I knew the truth was still parking outside, stepping out a black SUV, smoothing a coat, and coming in under the low golden lights. My name is Darius Coleman. I was 43 that winter, a black man from Detroit who made a living with his hands and hid behind that fact for years. I own an upholstery shop off Livernois where I restored church pews, dining chairs, barber seats, and the occasional classic car interior for men who love chrome more than conversation. My shop smelled like cedar dust, leather conditioner, and steam. I carried my father's orange measuring tape in my apron pocket every day like it was a prayer. I believe if I kept the home standing, that counted as love. It does not by itself. Simone and I had been married 11 years. She was 39, sharp-minded and impossible to ignore, with a voice that could make a room settle down without ever getting loud. She worked in development for a museum downtown, raising money, courting donors, writing polished proposals in loops of dark green ink with the fountain pens she collected like jewelry. At home, she lined her pens up in velvet trays and capped them with almost ceremonial care. She hated crooked frames, stale flowers, and lazy apologies. I loved her for her precision and feared it too, because my way was quieter, rougher, more unfinished. We met at a neighborhood book fair in northwest Detroit on a warm September afternoon when a church choir was rehearsing across the street, and somebody at the corner store was frying fish so hard the smell covered the whole block. I was there recovering folding chairs for the organizers. She was there helping a children's literacy table after her friend backed out. She asked if I always frowned while working. I told her only when a staple gun was involved. She laughed, not politely, but fully, head back, hand to chest, like delight had surprised her. That laugh followed me home and stayed for years. Back then, we built a life out of ordinary Detroit things and treated them like riches. Saturday coney dogs after errands. Early drove over to Belle Isle when the city was still rubbing sleep from its eyes. Sunday service at my mother's Baptist church where the ushers wore white gloves in summer, and everybody knew who had gotten engaged, fired, or saved before the benediction finished. Simone used to bring a yellow blanket to the riverfront in June, so we could watch the sun come up on Juneteenth. We had a ritual. No phones until the first orange line hit the water. That was ours. The first years were not glamorous, but they were alive. We painted our little brick house in Bagley 3 times because Simone changed her mind about the dining room color twice, and I pretended to mind more than I did. We argued over cabinet handles and laughed before bedtime. She read a copy out loud to me while I stripped old fabric off a chair in the kitchen. I cooked catfish on Fridays because that was my father's habit. She made pound cake from her aunt's recipe every Christmas and wrapped slices in wax paper for the neighbors. We were not effortless. We were engaged. There is a difference. If I am telling this story honestly, I have to say where I started losing her without even noticing. It was not abuse. It was not cruelty. It was absence disguised as responsibility. My father died 2 years into our marriage, and something in me narrowed after that. I kept working, kept fixing, kept paying. But I became a man who could discuss invoices, roof leaks, and brake pads longer than grief, loneliness, or fear. Simone would ask, "How you really doing?" And I would answer, "Busy." That word became my shield. A shield can protect a man. It can also keep his wife outside. The real shift started in the spring. Simone was promoted to senior director at the museum. Bigger donors. More travel between Detroit and Chicago. More evening receptions with men in expensive watches talking about civic legacy over bourbon. I was proud of her, and I said that. What I did not say was that her world started speaking a language I did not know, and instead of learning it, I retreated deeper into mine. She came home bright with stories about trustees, artists, and policy dinners. I answered with foam samples and shop schedules. We were still sharing a house. We had stopped sharing texture. That was also when Vaughn Ellison became a regular noun in our kitchen. Vaughn said this. Vaughn thought the donor wall should be redesigned. Vaughn knew somebody on a foundation board in Chicago. Vaughn had such good instincts about public messaging. He was a real estate developer and one of the museum's biggest donors, a man with polished shoes, expensive silence, and the kind of confidence that looks effortless until you realize somebody else is paying for it. At first, I barely registered with him. Wealthy men floated in and out of Simone's work stories all the time. Then his name stopped leaving. The changes were small enough to excuse one by one. Simone started leaving earlier and dressing at home instead of changing at the museum. A new perfume showed up, sharper and colder than the vanilla one she used to dab on her wrist before church. She began guarding little slices of her time like they had become private property. Her phone went to vibrate. Her laugh changed. Not all of it, just one version. There's a laugh a woman has when she is amused. There is another when she is being seen in a way she has missed. I heard that second one from our driveway. One Thursday, I came home early because a client canceled. I pulled into the alley behind our garage and heard Simone in the car before she noticed me. She was on Bluetooth, parked, engine off, laughing softly. Not the deep laugh from the book fair. Something lighter, tucked in close. Then she said, "No, stop. You're going to make me late." By the time I opened my door, she had ended the call and stepped out with her museum tote on her shoulder. "You're home early," she said. I almost asked who had her smiling into the steering wheel. I chose silence. My mother had a cardiology appointment at dawn, and I told myself I did not have room for a fight. That was the first fork in the road. I could have named what I heard while it was still a bruise instead of an injury. I did not. I chose peace because it felt noble, but if I am honest, I also chose it because I was scared she might confirm what I did not want to know. Men like me can confuse restraint with wisdom. Sometimes it is just fear wearing a church suit. So I took my mother to her appointment the next morning, sat beside her while she fussed about hospital coffee, and pretended my marriage had not changed shape in the dark. Summer came, thick and loud, and with it came our Juneteenth tradition. We had not missed that sunrise on Belle Island 9 years. Even during the pandemic, we parked, stayed in the car, and watched the sky break open over the river. That June, Simone said she had to host a breakfast for donors from out of state. "We will go next weekend," she said, already pulling on earrings in the mirror. I stood there with a folded yellow blanket in my hand and understood something had been demoted, not canceled. Demoted. That hurt worse. People cancel what they cannot help. They demote what matters less. I went to Belle Isle alone that morning. Families were setting up grills too early. Somebody had Old Mays playing from a portable speaker. A father was teaching a little girl to ride a bike near the fountain, his hand hovering at the back of the seat. I sat on our bench with the blanket beside me and watched Dawn arrive without us. I kept looking at my phone like Simone might suddenly remember the promise of that place, the way we used to sit there and speak plainly. She never called. By the time the sun rose, I knew a tradition had ended. I just did not know what else had gone with it. At the shop, my guys noticed I was off. Curtis, who had been reupholstering barber chairs longer than I had been shaving, watched me measure the same booth cushion twice and said, "Are you working or worrying?" I told him it was nothing. He snorted and kept stapling leather. A man says nothing when the thing is either money, health, or a woman. Curtis did not believe in delicate conversation, but he believed in accurate ones. I shrugged him off. He let me, before lunch. He slid a honey bun onto my work table and said, "Whatever it is, stop acting like infusion is a plan." I still hear that line. The first tangible clue came in September inside a blazer pocket. Simone had come home late from a museum board dinner, tired and irritable, and dropped her clothes over the bedroom chair. I was gathering dry cleaning the next morning when a parking stub slipped out and landed on my shoe. Valet, the Orleans Hotel in Birmingham. Midnight 12. The thing was, Simone had told me the dinner ended at the museum and she drove straight home because she had an early meeting. I stood there holding that little cream ticket between my fingers like it might explain itself if I waited long enough. I took it to the kitchen, set it beside my coffee, and stared at it until the clock on the stove blinked to 7:10. Then I threw it away. That was the second fork in the road. I could have fished it back out, laid it on the table, and made her answer for it before breakfast. Instead, I let the trash lid close. Why? Because I already knew how I would sound. Suspicious, wounded, reaching. I hated the idea of becoming a man who checked pockets and assembled evidence from scraps. I told myself trust required dignity. I did not yet understand that dignity also requires honesty with yourself. A week later, Simone and I went to my mother's church for the annual fish fry fundraiser. It was one of those loud, bright church basements where aluminum trays stacked up under steam, Annie's ran the dessert table like air traffic control, and children slid in Sunday shoes no matter how many adults hissed at them. My mother wore her coral hat and introduced Simone to everybody like we had just gotten married yesterday. Simone smiled, hugged people, took compliments on her dress, then kept glancing at her phone under the table. Finally, she stood and said she had to take a donor call outside. I watched her through the little basement window near the parking lot. She was not taking a tense work call. She was pacing slowly, one hand over her mouth, smiling. I had seen enough by then to know the difference between stress and affection. When she came back in, I asked, "Everything all right?" She tucked the phone into her purse and said, "Do not do this here. Not what to call. Not who was that. Just a warning shot." We drove home in silence while gospel radio murmured from the dashboard. She looked out her window almost the whole ride, like I was the one crowding her. That night we argued for real. Not loudly, but sharply, which can cut deeper. I asked if there was someone she was closer to than she had admitted. She took off her earrings one by one and laid them in the tray on her dresser with such care it made me angrier. "I am tired of being questioned every time my life gets larger than this house," she said. "Larger than this house?" I repeated, "That is what you heard?" She turned and faced me then, eyes steady. "What I heard is that you only pay attention when you feel left behind." That sentence sat in me because part of it was true. After that, I stopped trying to win the argument in my head and started paying attention to facts. I did not go through her phone. I decided early that if I crossed that line, I would lose some part of myself that I still needed, regardless of what she had done. But money leaves trails, and schedules do too. We shared 2 credit cards and 1 household account. When I reviewed the statements, certain patterns surfaced. Friday valet near downtown hotels. Late lunch charges for 2 in midtown restaurants she had never once mentioned. Floral purchases that never entered our house. Each line was ordinary. Together, they formed a sentence. I also started looking at public things. Museum newsletters, gala photos, event recaps. In one set of pictures from a donor cocktail reception, There was Simone in a blue dress and Vaughn Ellison beside her, laughing at something off camera. His hand was not grabbing, not crude, nothing so obvious. It rested at the center of her back with a familiarity that said practice. I enlarged the photo until the pixels broke apart. There was something humiliating about that, a husband pinching and spreading a screen in his own kitchen to study another man's hand. Humiliating but clarifying. My mind stopped negotiating. Vaughn was married. I learned that from a museum leadership page first, then from a local foundation feature. His wife, Celeste Ellison, was principal at charter school on the East Side, a black woman with wise eyes and a smile that looked patient rather than soft. In one article, she talked about literacy rates with the kind of seriousness I recognized from school administrators and church mothers. She stood next to Vaughn in photos with one hand on his arm and the expression of someone accustomed to carrying things with both grace and fatigue. I stared at her picture longer than I expected. Another life was inside this mess. 3 nights, I drafted messages to Celeste and deleted them. The first sounded angry. The second sounded like a detective. The third sounded pathetic. In the end, I wrote 4 lines. My name is Darius Coleman. I believe my wife and your husband may be involved. I would not contact you unless I thought the pattern was serious. If you are willing, I can share what I know. I sent it after midnight from the work computer in my shop office because our house felt too holy and too broken for that kind of email. Then I sat there listening to the compressor kick on and off. Celeste replied the next afternoon while I was replacing springs in a restaurant booth. Her email was short. I have suspected something. Call me after 8. My hands shook so badly I had to set the staple gun down. That night, I took the call from my truck parked around the block because I could not risk Simone hearing the first truthful conversation I had had about our marriage in months. Celeste's voice was low, controlled, and tired. Not surprised. Not exactly. Just tired in the way a person sounds when reality finally stops asking permission before entering the room. We compared dates first, because dates are cleaner than pain. The Birmingham hotel valet matched the school fundraising dinner Celeste had been told Vaughn could not attend because of an investor meeting. Simone's overnight trip to Chicago aligned with a men's retreat he had described to his deacons. A Thursday luncheon charge on our card matched the day Celeste said Vaughn turned off his location and came home with an excuse about a dead battery. Then the details widened. She told me he had started wearing a different cologne. I told her Simone had started humming in the kitchen again, but never around me. At one point, Celeste got quiet, then said, I found a receipt for 2 hot chocolates at Easter Market on a morning. He told me he was touring a site alone. That detail broke my heart more than a hotel would have. Hot chocolate, morning light, the tenderness of small, ordinary cheating. I told her about Belle Isle, about our Juneteenth bench and the yellow blanket folded on the passenger seat. She breathed in sharply. So they did not just take bodies, she said. They took rituals. I had not found those words yet, but once she said them, they settled in exactly where they belonged. We made a decision together, and it mattered to me that we made it carefully. We would not blast them on social media. We would not call jobs first. We would not turn private pain into theater for people who did not have to live with the consequences. We wanted one moment that neither of them could spin into our insecurity. One moment where the story in their mouths collided with the truth in the room. I suggested a direct confrontation at the house. Celeste said no. At home, he will turn into volume, she said. I want witnesses, not chaos. She was right. The opportunity came sooner than either of us expected. 2 evenings later, Simone came into the den while I was standing in the armrest of an old choir chair I had brought home to finish. She stood there watching the dust collect on the drop cloth and said, Can we have dinner Friday? Somewhere neutral. We need to make some decisions. Neutral. That word told me everything. She wanted clean lines. She wanted to walk into a room where nobody had seen us build anything and explain why she was done carrying it. I looked up and said, Sure. My pulse was so loud, I barely heard my own voice. I texted Celeste immediately after Simone went upstairs. She wrote back in under a minute. Vaughn told me he has a donor dinner Friday in Corktown. There it was. Same night, same part of the city. Same lie. dressed in slightly different clothes. We chose the supper club because it was the kind of place both of them would consider discreet. Celeste said she would ride with Vaughn and tell him she wanted to join the donors for a drink because she had finished parent conferences early. I reserved a table for 2 at 7. My stomach felt like I had swallowed a box of nails. Friday arrived under a gray Detroit sky that could not decide between sleet and rain. At the shop, every sound got on my nerves. Compressor hiss, staple pops, the scrape of chair legs on concrete. Curtis finally leaned on my table and said, "Either tell me what is eating you, or go home before you staple your hand to that cushion." I told him my marriage might be ending. He looked at me for a long second, then nodded once. "Then do not go in there begging for an explanation from people already committed to lying. Sometimes wisdom comes from a man covered in sawdust." I went home early, showered, and dressed slowly. Dark shirt, wool coat, the good watch Simone bought me on our 5th anniversary, though part of me wanted to leave it in the drawer. In the bathroom mirror, I looked like a man trying to present calm from the outside in. Simone came downstairs 20 minutes later in a cream coat, gold hoops, and those heel boots she wore when she wanted to feel taller than the room. She smelled like the new perfume. In the car, she said almost nothing, just adjusted the vents and checked her lipstick in the visor mirror, like we were heading to an awards dinner. The supper club was warm and low-lit, with a piano, upright bass, and trumpets set in the corner. Rain tapped the front windows. Couples were already settled into banquettes, jackets hanging over chair backs, cocktails glowing. We were seated near the center, not far from the aisle. Simone thanked the hostess with that polished smile she used at museum events. I looked at the entrance once, then made myself stop. Celeste had texted, running a few minutes behind. He suspects nothing. That message sat in my pocket like a live wire while Simone unfolded her napkin and smoothed it over her lap with great care. We did not bother with fake intimacy. Simone looked at the menu, closed it, and folded her hands. "I do not want to drag this out," she said. Her voice was soft enough that the next table could not hear, but firm enough that she had clearly practiced it. "I have not been happy for a long time." I said nothing. She took that as permission and continued. "I have changed. Our marriage is not. I feel watched here, managed here, reduced here. I signed a lease in Midtown. I'm moving next Thursday." The trumpet player moved into another song while my life split in half. I asked the simplest question I could manage. "Is there someone else?" Simone did not lower her eyes. That was one of her gifts and one of her dangers. She could look straight at a painful thing and make it sound organized. "Yes," she said. "There's been. I did not plan it. I did not go looking for it. But I am not going to stand here and call it nothing. Stand here." We were seated. But that was Simone all over. Even in confession, she spoke like she was at a podium. My chest hurt, but another part of me had gone oddly still. "Does his wife know?" I asked. That was the first time her control flickered. Just a blink, a pause, the slightest lift of her shoulders. "That is not my marriage," she said. "No," I replied, finally looking toward the door. "It is mine. And hers." Simone followed my eyes without meaning to. The front door opened. Cold air slid in. Vaughn Ellison stepped inside, one hand holding the door, the other adjusting the cuff of his coat. Celeste came in right behind him in a rust-colored wool dress, carrying herself like a woman who had decided not to tremble in public. Simone froze, so completely I thought for a second she had stopped breathing. All the color left her face at once. Vaughn saw us 3 steps later. It was almost impressive, the number of emotions that crossed a grown man's face in less than a second. Confusion, recognition, calculation, fear. Celeste did not look at him. She looked at Simone first, then me, then the empty space around us, like she was taking inventory before a storm. The piano kept playing for another few bars before the trio sensed something in the room had changed and let the song trail off unfinished. "Well," Celeste said, not loudly, but with enough weight that nearby conversations thinned out around us. "That saves time." Vaughn reached for her elbow. She moved out of range without making a show of it. Simone's lips parted, but no sound came. The woman who could command museum boards and donor rooms had suddenly gone mute. I stood up because sitting there felt impossible. Not to fight, not to perform, just to get air into my body. Celeste stayed standing too, her coat still on. You told me this was a donor dinner, she said to Vaughn. Now I know what you meant by donor. Vaughn tried to recover the situation the way men like him always do, by lowering his voice as if discretion itself could rebuild character. Celeste, this is not the place, he said. She gave a short, disbelieving laugh. You are right, she answered. The place would have been our house 6 months ago, or your truck, or the school parking lot where I cried, because I thought I was losing my mind. Then she turned to Simone. You sat in my face at that literacy brunch in October and asked about my students. Simone whispered, Celeste, I am sorry. It sounded tiny, late, and insufficient. I looked at Simone then, really looked, not at the coat or the careful makeup or the woman who had come prepared to leave. I looked at the fear underneath it. How long? I asked. She opened her mouth. I closed it. Vaughn answered instead, which somehow made it uglier. It is complicated. I laughed once, and it surprised even me. No, I said, complicated is a tax code. This is lying. A server appeared, took one glance at our faces, and backed away with the skill of someone who had seen enough bad anniversaries to know when not to interrupt. Rain kept needling the windows. Then came the sentence that changed something in me for good. Simone leaned toward me and said, so softly I might have missed it if I had still been trying to save her, I did not know she was coming. Now I am sorry. Now I betrayed you. Now I destroyed us. Her first panic was about exposure. I felt whatever hope I had still had to settle to the floor and stay there. I know, I said. That is the only reason you look scared. She flinched. Across from us, Celeste closed her eyes briefly like a woman absorbing a blow she had expected and still hated. There was no screaming. That is one thing people get wrong about endings. Sometimes the worst ones are quiet enough for silverware to still matter. I took my wallet out, placed cash beneath the water glass, and put on my coat. Simone reached for my hand. Her fingers were cold. For years, that touch would have pulled me back into repair mode. Not then. I eased my hand away. I will not help you narrate this into something prettier than it was. I told her. Vaughn was staring at the floor. Celeste stood straighter. I walked past them through the aisle and out into the Detroit rain. The air outside hit me like a slap and a release at the same time. I stood under the awning listening to traffic hiss along the wet street, trying to remember how to inhabit my own body. A minute later, Celeste came out. Not because we were suddenly friends in some movie way, but because we were the only two people on that block who knew exactly what just happened. She stood beside me, arms folded against the cold. I needed to see their faces, she said. Me too, I answered. We did not hug. We did not dramatize it. We just stood there and let the rain keep time. Simone came home after midnight. I knew because I heard her moving to the hallway. Slow, careful, as if gentleness could change what she had done. I stayed in the den on the sofa, fully dressed, staring at the dark television. She stopped in the doorway and said my name. Not baby, not Darius, please. Just my name, like she was trying to find the right version of me to speak to and could not. I messed this up, she said. I almost laughed at the size of that understatement. No, I told her. You built this. Now you are standing inside it. The next morning she cried at the kitchen table. Over coffee neither of us drank. She said the affair had started as emotional support after a brutal fundraising quarter. She said Vaughn listened in ways I no longer had. She said she felt alive with him, admired, chosen. Some of that hurt, because some of it reflected my failures back at me. I had stopped asking deeper questions. I had hidden in work and grief and routine. But I also understood something clearly by then. Loneliness explains vulnerability. It does not excuse deceit. I told her we could discuss logistics, but I would not participate in a redemption speech. That was the third and hardest fork in the road. Part of me wanted to rescue the marriage because rescue was familiar. I knew how to fix chairs, roofs, schedules, moods. I knew how to call pain temporary if it meant I could keep the structure standing. But if I had taken Simone back that morning simply because she got caught before she got brave, I would have trained myself to live beneath my own standards. So I chose what felt brutal and clean. I asked her to stay with her sister in Southfield, while we contacted a mediator. She stared at me like I had turned into a stranger. Maybe I had. The months after that were not cinematic. They were paperwork, divided bookshelves, forwarded mail, and explaining things to my mother without giving her details she could weaponize at church. Simone moved into the loft she had already leased. Then, after 6 weeks, she wanted out of it because it never felt like home. I said nothing. We met with a mediator in a beige office with fake plants and stale coffee. We sold the house in spring. I wrapped her fountain pen trays in newspaper and labeled the box fragile because I'm still the kind of man who handles breakables carefully, even when they belong to someone who broke me. I started therapy because I did not want to spend the next 10 years telling the story as if I were only a victim and not also a participant in my own silence. My therapist, a black woman on the East Side who wore bright scarves and did not let me romanticize stoicism, asked me one question in our second session. When did you decide competence was safer than intimacy? I had no answer that day. Later I realized the answer was probably childhood, probably my father, probably all the ways black men are taught to be useful before we are taught to be emotionally fluent. Understanding that did not erase my pain. It gave it shape. Celeste filed for divorce in August. We spoke a handful of times after that, mostly about lawyers, timelines, and surreal business of untangling a life after deceit. Once she told me Vaughn had moved into a furnished apartment near downtown and kept trying to frame the affair as two unhappy people who found connection. I told him unhappy people can still tell the truth, she said. I laughed then, genuinely, maybe for the first time in weeks. There was comfort in hearing someone else refuse the pretty language cheaters use to make destruction sound like destiny. We never became a couple. Pain is not a dating service. Simone's consequences arrived slowly, which is how real life usually works. Some museum board members learned about the relationship because Detroit is a city with long memories and short routes between gossip. She was not marched out in disgrace. Nothing dramatic like that. But her position became untenable. Donor relationships got reassigned. Invitations dried up. She resigned before winter and took consulting work from home. Vaughn did not leave his wife for her in any meaningful way. One's secrecy was gone, so was most of his courage. What remained between them could not survive daylight, rent, disappointment, and two people seeing each other without fantasy doing the lighting. As for me, I kept the shop. I repainted the office. Threw out the crack fan that had rattled for years. Started taking Sunday mornings back. Sometimes I went to Belle Isle before service with a thermos of coffee and no yellow blanket, just to sit on that bench and let the city wake up around me. The first few times I felt foolish and unfinished. Then, little by little, I felt present. Not healed in some neat way, just a present. The father teaching his daughter to ride a bike was gone. New families came. Geese argued at the shoreline. The river kept moving. So, did I. The last time Simone came by the shop, she stood among the barber chairs waiting for me to finish stitching a cracked seat seam. She looked smaller somehow, though maybe it was only that certainty had left her. She asked if I hated her. I kept sewing for another few seconds before answering. No, I said, I hate what happened. I hate the way we got here. I hate the lies. She nodded and cried quietly. I did love you, she said. I know, I answered. But at the end, you loved how you felt with him more than what you owed the truth. That was all there was to say. What stays with me from this story is not just a dinner confession. It is a yellow blanket on Belle Isle, the valet stub in a blazer pocket, and the way Simone's first fear was being seen, not what she had done. That is the lesson. Pay attention when someone starts protecting appearances harder than they protect the relationship. And if you are the one who has gone quiet, do not wait until betrayal teaches you the value of an honest conversation you could have had months earlier. If the story hit you hard, do not leave without telling me the moment you knew Simone was gone emotionally. Was it Belle Isle, the valet stub, or that dinner table confession? Like this video, share it with someone who loves powerful relationship drama, and subscribe for more original first-person cheating wife stories, betrayal stories, and shocking marriage endings. The end.